The Cathan fleet drifted silently through the vast emptiness of space, their metallic hulls glinting faintly as they approached the small, blue planet. Earth was a speck, insignificant amidst the galactic expanse. Commander Zarak Thal stood on the bridge of the flagship, his imposing figure illuminated by the soft glow of holographic displays. His crimson eyes scanned the planet's surface, his lips curling into a faint sneer. Another primitive world. Another conquest. The Cathans had crushed empires spanning galaxies, dismantled civilizations that had thrived for millennia. Earth would be no different. The initial scans were laughable. Minimal defenses, a scattering of weak settlements, and crude technology that barely qualified as advanced weaponry. Zarak leaned back, his confidence unshaken. "Prepare the infantry," he commanded, his voice cold and commanding. The tactical officer, a cautious figure named Lyrex, hesitated. "Commander, the data on Earth's history suggests." Zarak cut him off with a dismissive wave. "Spare me tales of human resilience. They are a fractured species, their conflicts amongst themselves proof of their disorganization. This will be over in a matter of days." The landing crafts descended, breaking through Earth's atmosphere in a spectacle of fire and shadow. Civilian populations scattered like ants, their cries of terror echoing across the cities. The Cathans made their move swiftly, deploying troops to the outskirts of a sprawling urban center. The first wave of infantry strode forward with mechanical precision, their sleek armor gleaming and their energy weapons humming with deadly promise. The humans were unprepared, or so it seemed. Scattered defensive forces made a feeble attempt at resistance, their small arms fire bouncing harmlessly off Cathan shields. Buildings crumbled under the weight of the assault and smoke filled the air. Zarak watched from above, his confidence growing with every report of chaos below. But then something changed. The Cathan vanguard, which had been advancing unopposed, encountered a peculiar resistance. Human soldiers, dressed in rudimentary combat gear, moved with an unsettling calm. They did not panic, nor did they scatter like the civilians. Instead, they began to fight back with precision that defied expectation. From the shadows of ruined buildings and the cover of debris, they launched coordinated strikes. Every move seemed calculated, every ambush meticulously planned. The first shock came when a Cathan armored unit was taken down not by advanced weaponry but by a simple yet effective trap. A crude explosive device, hidden beneath a pile of rubble, tore through their defenses. The aliens were unprepared for such tactics, their reliance on technology making them vulnerable to the ingenuity of their opponents. Commander Lyrex's voice trembled slightly as he watched the feed from the battlefield. "The humans are employing methods we haven't encountered before. They exploit terrain and adapt faster than expected." Zarak's expression hardened. "They are using desperation as a weapon. It changes nothing." Yet, as the reports continued to stream in, it became increasingly clear that this was not mere desperation. The humans moved with an eerie unity, their strikes synchronized as if guided by an unseen hand. The Cathans began to falter. Their heavy artillery, so effective against conventional armies, was rendered useless in the close-quarters combat of urban warfare. Every time they adjusted their strategy, the humans countered with something new. Zarak stood motionless, his eyes fixed on the displays. He watched as human soldiers flanked a Cathan unit, cutting off their escape and systematically dismantling them. Their movements were deliberate, their aim unerring. These were not warriors driven by rage or fear, they were something else entirely. "What do we know of these forces?" Zarak demanded, his voice sharper now. Lyrex hesitated before responding. "These are regular units, Commander. Baseline human infantry." Zarak's gaze snapped to him, disbelief flickering across his usually stoic face. "Baseline," he repeated, the word dripping with contempt. Lyrex nodded, his expression grave. "There is no evidence of their elite forces on the field yet." Before Zarak could respond, a tremor shook the ship. He turned toward the viewport, his eyes narrowing as a series of explosions lit up the horizon. The humans had targeted the landing zone, catching the Cathan reinforcements in a devastating barrage. Zarak's confidence, once unshakable, now wavered. These were not the actions of a disorganized, primitive species. This was the work of a force that understood the art of war. He replayed the footage from earlier battles, studying the humans in detail. Their psychological resilience was unnerving. Even under the relentless firepower of the Cathans, they did not break. Instead, they regrouped, strategized, and retaliated with a ferocity that left no room for doubt. "These humans," Xerak muttered, more to himself than to his crew. "They fight as if they have faced annihilation before." Lyrex shifted uncomfortably, his earlier warnings now echoing in his mind. "Commander, there are historical records that suggest." "Silence," Xerak snapped, though the edge in his voice betrayed his growing unease. Another explosion rocked the ship and alarms blared across the bridge. Lyrex glanced at the monitors, his face paling. "They've breached our outer defenses." Xerak's hands clenched into fists as he turned to face his crew. "Deploy the secondary wave. I want this planet subdued by nightfall." As the orders were carried out, Xerak returned to the display, his mind racing. This was not how it was supposed to go. The Cathans had conquered countless worlds, each one falling like dominoes before their might. Yet here they were, struggling against a species that should have been an afterthought. On the battlefield, the humans continued to push forward, their tactics evolving with every encounter. They exploited every weakness, turned every misstep into an opportunity. To the Cathans, it was as if the humans could predict their moves before they made them. Xerak could not ignore the sinking feeling in his chest. These were not ordinary opponents. Something about them defied logic, defied expectation. For the first time in his long career of conquest, doubt began to creep into his mind. As the sun dipped below the horizon, casting the battlefield in shadows, a final explosion shook the ground. Xerak watched as the human forces advanced, their silhouettes illuminated by the flames of his burning landing zone. This was no primitive resistance. This was war. And for the first time, Xerak wasn't sure if the Cathans would emerge victorious. The ground rumbled beneath the weight of human artillery, a deafening symphony of explosions that illuminated the night sky. Smoke billowed from the remains of the Cathan landing zone, and the once confident invaders found themselves pinned under relentless fire. The counteroffensive had begun, and it was unlike anything they had anticipated. Human tanks rolled forward, their thick armor shrugging off alien energy blasts as they advanced with unwavering determination. From concealed positions, infantry units rained precision fire upon the Cathan forces, picking apart their formations piece by piece. Commander Xerak Thal stood frozen on the bridge of his flagship, his crimson eyes glued to the chaotic displays. The humans were no longer defending, they were attacking. Their artillery targeted critical Cathan assets with unnerving accuracy, crippling supply lines and demolishing key defensive positions. The terrain itself seemed to conspire against the invaders, with human forces using forests, mountains, and urban rubble to outmaneuver the technologically superior aliens. Commander Lyrex called, his voice strained. "Our forces are being outflanked. The humans are using their terrain knowledge to isolate and destroy our units." Xerak clenched his fists. Impossible. They lack the resources for such coordination. They're just primitives. But even as he spoke, he knew it was a lie. The humans fought with an efficiency that defied explanation. It was as though they were connected by some invisible thread, their movements synchronized in a way that left no gaps in their strategy. Every attack, every maneuver was executed with perfect timing. On the ground, Cathan officers were beginning to panic. Reports flooded in from the battlefield, each more unsettling than the last. The humans showed no hesitation, no fear. They moved with the confidence of seasoned warriors, unshaken even in the face of overwhelming alien firepower. Captured Cathan infantry described human soldiers as cold, calculating, and disturbingly relentless. They fought as if they had nothing to lose. "They don't falter," a shaken officer reported over the comms. "Even when surrounded, they fight like they've faced this before." Xerak's claws tapped rhythmically against the control panel as he considered his options. The initial wave had underestimated their opponents, but this was something more. These were not just defenders protecting their home. They were predators in their own right, and the Cathans had become the prey. A desperate order was issued to deploy the elite shock troopers. clad in advanced cloaking technology and armed with energy weapons that could vaporize most enemies with a single shot. The shock troopers were the pride of the Cathan military. They had turned the tide in countless battles across the galaxy, breaking even the most resilient enemies. Their arrival briefly shifted the momentum. The shock troopers moved like shadows, their cloaking devices rendering them nearly invisible as they infiltrated human positions. Ambushes were sprung, and entire human squads were wiped out in seconds. For a moment, it seemed as though the Cathans might regain control. But the humans adapted. They always adapted. Within hours, the shock troopers began to fall. Human forces intercepted their communications, predicting their movements with chilling precision. Makeshift detection systems, hastily constructed from salvaged alien equipment, neutralized their cloaking devices. Traps were laid with uncanny foresight, and one by one, the shock troopers were eliminated. "They're learning faster than we can adjust," Lyrax muttered, his usually composed demeanor now laced with fear. "This isn't normal, Commander. They're evolving." Xerac said nothing, his gaze fixed on the tactical map. The humans were exploiting every weakness, turning every advantage against them. He thought of the recorded footage from earlier battles, the calm precision, the unshakable resolve. These were not the actions of an inferior species. As the Cathan forces crumbled under the relentless human assault, Xerac overheard a transmission from the surface. The human voice was steady, almost casual, but the words sent a chill down his spine. "Hold the line. Special forces are inbound." Xerac turned sharply toward Lyrax. "What do they mean by special forces? Who are they?" Lyrax hesitated, his hands trembling as he accessed the intelligence archives. "Commander, we've intercepted reports of specialized human units referred to as planetary purgers. They're deployed only in the direst of circumstances. The records suggest they're something beyond normal soldiers." Xerac's jaw tightened. "Explain." "There's little concrete information," Lyrax admitted. "Only fragments, whispers of a force trained for total annihilation. If the regular troops are this effective..." The thought trailed off, but the implication was clear. If these were just ordinary human soldiers, what could their special forces do? The comms crackled again, this time carrying the voice of a captured human. The soldier's words were calm, almost taunting. "You think this is bad," he said, his voice cutting through the silence of the bridge. "Wait until they come." Xerac's claws dug into the armrest of his chair, his confidence unraveling with every passing moment. For the first time in his long career of conquest, he felt something he had never experienced before. Fear. On the battlefield, the humans pressed their advantage. Mechanized units rolled through the Cathan lines, their turrets swiveling with mechanical precision to target fleeing alien soldiers. Infantry squads moved in perfect formation, sweeping through the remains of the enemy forces with ruthless efficiency. Every attempt by the Cathans to regroup was met with a swift, calculated counterattack. From the safety of the flagship, Xerac could only watch as his forces were dismantled piece by piece. The humans had turned the tide, and it was clear that this was only the beginning. The promise of their special forces loomed like a shadow over the battlefield, a silent threat that filled even the most hardened Cathan warriors with dread. As the night wore on, Xerac stared out at the burning horizon, the realization sinking in like a blade to the chest. They had underestimated Earth, and it might be the last mistake the Cathans ever made. The battlefield had fallen into an eerie stillness, punctuated only by the distant rumble of explosions. Smoke hung heavy in the air, mingling with the acrid stench of burning machinery and scorched earth. The remnants of the Cathan forces scrambled to regroup, their once pristine formations now little more than scattered clusters of panicked soldiers. Commander Xerac Thal stood on the bridge of his flagship, his gaze fixed on the chaos below. Every plan, every strategy had crumbled under the relentless human assault. Yet the most unsettling part of it all was the feeling that this was not over, that something worse was coming. It began without warning. From the horizon, sleek human aircraft streaked through the smoke-filled sky, their engines whisper quiet compared to the thunderous roar of traditional jets. They moved with unsettling precision, dropping payloads that ignited with a blinding brilliance, obliterating key Cathan installations. Before the Carathans could mount a response, the first wave of new human forces descended upon the battlefield. They emerged from the shadows like specters, clad in armor that seemed to absorb the surrounding light. Minimalistic in design yet menacing in its starkness, the armor bore no insignias, no marks of individuality. These were not ordinary soldiers. They were something else entirely. The special forces moved as one, their steps silent, their movements deliberate. Unlike the regular human infantry, who fought with visible determination and emotion, these soldiers were devoid of any outward signs of humanity. They neither spoke nor hesitated, their actions carried out with an eerie synchronization that suggested a shared consciousness. Where they struck, the battlefield fell silent, as if the very air had been drained of life. The Cathan forces were unprepared for this new wave of precision and brutality. Within minutes, key command posts were dismantled, their officers eliminated with surgical efficiency. Entire units were eradicated before they could even register the attack. The special forces moved like shadows, appearing and disappearing without a trace, their advanced weaponry cutting through alien armor like paper. Cathan communications were in disarray, their once proud military reduced to chaos. Xerox watched the unfolding carnage in stunned silence. His tactical officer, Lyrax, stood beside him, his face pale and his voice trembling. "Commander, they've breached our secondary command structure. Reports indicate they're repurposing our own technology against us." Xerox's claws scraped against the armrest of his chair. How he demanded, though he already knew the answer. These humans, these special forces, were not simply soldiers. They were weapons, designed for one purpose: total annihilation. The psychological toll was immediate. Alien officers whispered of human soldiers who seemed to materialize out of thin air, striking without warning and vanishing just as quickly. Entire Cathan units abandoned their posts, unable to withstand the suffocating fear that now gripped them. The humans exploited this fear mercilessly. Hacking into Cathan communications, they broadcast chilling messages in flawless Cathan dialect, their voices devoid of emotion. "This is only the beginning," they said, their words echoing through the already frayed nerves of the alien forces. Xerox felt the weight of those words pressing down on him. For the first time in his long career of conquest, he understood what it meant to face an enemy who fought not just to win, but to ensure their opponent never recovered. The humans didn't simply defeat their enemies, they dismantled them, piece by piece, until there was nothing left but the memory of fear. On the ground, the special forces continued their relentless advance. They moved with machine-like precision, targeting Cathan officers with chilling accuracy. One by one, the leaders of Xerox's army fell, leaving their troops directionless and demoralized. Even the most advanced Cathan weapons were turned against their creators, repurposed with brutal ingenuity to further the human assault. A captured Cathan officer knelt before one of the human operatives, his armor scorched and his face twisted in desperation. "Please," he begged, his voice a trembling whisper. "Show mercy." The human operative's helmet tilted slightly, the reflective visor obscuring any trace of emotion. "Mercy is for those who don't threaten our home," came the cold reply. The officer's plea was met with silence, followed by the swift, clinical execution of the mission. Xerox watched the feed with growing dread. This was no ordinary war. The humans fought with a detachment that was almost inhuman, as if they had stripped away every ounce of compassion to focus solely on survival. These special forces were not just soldiers, they were strategic weapons, designed to obliterate enemy morale as thoroughly as they destroyed infrastructure. The Cathan fleet orbiting Earth had begun to fracture. Captains hesitated to deploy reinforcements, their confidence shaken by the reports flooding in from the surface. Small groups of Cathan survivors were allowed to escape, but even this mercy was calculated. These survivors carried with them tales of the special forces, spreading fear among their comrades. The psychological warfare was as devastating as the physical assaults. Xerox gritted his teeth, his claws digging into the armrest as he struggled to maintain composure. "We need to regroup," he said, though the words felt hollow even as he spoke them. "We will not be broken by these creatures." Lyrax turned to him, his expression grim. "Commander, this isn't just a battle anymore. This is a message. They want us to know that we don't belong here." Xerox's gaze flicked back to the battlefield. where the last remnants of his command structure were being dismantled. He thought of the captured human soldier's words, the calm warning that had filled him with unease. If you think this is bad, wait until they come now, he understood. The special forces weren't just a weapon, they were a promise. A promise that humanity would do whatever it took to defend their home, no matter the cost. As the night deepened, Zarak could feel the weight of defeat pressing down on him. The Cathans had underestimated Earth, and now they were paying the price. The humans were not the primitive, fractured species they had believed them to be. They were something far more dangerous. They were survivors. The command center was eerily quiet, the silence broken only by the distant sound of explosions echoing through the fortified walls. Zarak stood in the center of the room, his crimson eyes scanning the holographic displays that showed the rapidly deteriorating state of his forces. The once proud Cathan army had been reduced to scattered remnants, their morale shattered and their will to fight extinguished. What few soldiers remained had retreated to the final stronghold, a base that now felt more like a tomb than a fortress. Outside, the humans had them surrounded. Their special forces, those relentless, silent harbingers of destruction, moved like ghosts through the smoke and debris, tightening the noose around the Cathan position. Zarak had always considered himself a master strategist, a conqueror who thrived in the chaos of war. But now, as he watched his forces crumble under the weight of an unstoppable enemy, he felt something unfamiliar and deeply unsettling: helplessness. Commander Lyrax said, his voice barely a whisper. The perimeter has been breached. They're inside. Zarak's claws flexed against the control panel, his mind racing. He had no reinforcements, no escape plan, and no hope of turning the tide. The humans had outmaneuvered him at every turn, their tactics a chilling combination of precision and ruthlessness. The special forces had dismantled his command structure, leaving his troops leaderless and scattered. There was nothing left to fight with, no path forward except surrender. The breach came swiftly. The reinforced doors of the stronghold, designed to withstand the most advanced weaponry in the galaxy, were reduced to molten slag in seconds. The special forces entered without a sound, their sleek armor gleaming in the dim light. They moved with an almost supernatural calm, their weapons raised but not fired. It was a gesture of absolute control, a silent declaration that resistance was futile. Zarak stood his ground as the humans approached, his tall frame rigid with defiance. He would not cower before these creatures, even in defeat. One of the soldiers stepped forward, his helmet obscuring his face, but his posture radiating authority. Behind him, more troops filed in, securing the room with swift, deliberate movements. "You are Commander Zarak Thal," the human officer said, his voice flat and emotionless. It was not a question. Zarak inclined his head, his expression unreadable. "If you've come for my surrender, you have it. But know this, I yield not out of fear, but out of necessity." The officer didn't respond. Instead, he motioned to one of his subordinates, who produced a recording device. The cold gleam of the device seemed to reflect the finality of the moment. "You will deliver a message," the officer said, his tone devoid of compassion. "To your fleet, to your people, to anyone who would dare follow in your path. You will tell them what you've seen here." Zarak's eyes narrowed, his pride warring with the crushing weight of his circumstances. "And if I refuse?" The officer's silence was more chilling than any threat. Slowly, Zarak reached for the device, his claws trembling with suppressed rage. He activated the recording, his voice steady despite the humiliation coursing through him. "This is Commander Zarak Thal of the Cathan Empire," he began, each word a dagger to his pride. "Earth is not what we believed it to be. Its people are not weak, not primitive. They are something else. Resilient beyond measure, united in a way we cannot comprehend. They have defeated us, not through superior technology, but through sheer will and ingenuity. To any who hear this, abandon any thought of conquering this world. Do not repeat our mistakes." His voice faltered slightly as he concluded, his crimson eyes reflecting the weight of his words. "Earth is not a prize to be claimed. It is a warning." The officer stepped forward, taking the recording device from Zarak's hand. He held it for a moment before glancing at one of his soldiers. "Send it to the fleet. Make sure it's received by every Cathan ship." Another human soldier turned to Zarak, his voice as cold and unyielding as the steel in his hands. "This is your one warning," he said, the finality of his words hanging heavy in the air. As the humans withdrew, Zarak sank into his chair, the full weight of his failure pressing down on him. He watched as the transmission was sent, his words now echoing across the Cathan fleet. The ships in orbit began to pull back, retreating into the black void of space. They would leave Earth, but they would not forget. The flagship's engines hummed to life as it prepared to depart. From the observation deck, Zarak stared out at the blue planet growing smaller in the distance. It was a world unlike any he had ever encountered. Its people were forged by their own struggles, their history one of constant conflict and survival. They had become something more than a species. They were a force of nature, a testament to the resilience of life in its harshest form. Zarak's thoughts were a whirlwind of regret and reflection. He had underestimated humanity, seen them as nothing more than another conquest to add to his long list of victories. But now he understood. Earth had shaped its inhabitants into something terrifyingly unique, a blend of raw determination and unbreakable unity. It was not their technology or their weapons that had defeated him, but their spirit. As the fleet retreated, Zarak made a silent vow. His people would remember this defeat, not as a shameful loss, but as a lesson. The Cathan Empire had been humbled, and it was a lesson they could not afford to forget. He would ensure that his people learned from this, that they respected the strength of the enemy they had underestimated. Back on Earth, the Special Forces debriefed in a secure facility, their faces obscured by helmets and their movements as unreadable as ever. A general watched the reports coming in, his expression a mixture of relief and grim determination. "They'll think twice before coming back," one officer said, his tone cautious but hopeful. The general nodded, his gaze fixed on the map of Earth displayed on the screen. The planet was scarred from the conflict, its cities battered but still standing. Humanity had endured, as it always did. "If they come back," the general said, his voice low but firm, "we'll be ready." As the camera panned out, Earth came into view, a small, fragile-looking world suspended in the vastness of space. It was a world shaped by its struggles, its surface marked by scars that told stories of survival and resilience. And yet, it was stronger because of those scars. It was a world that would never bow to those who sought to conquer it, a testament to the unyielding nature of humanity.